resolutory. Yan. Suspensive or resolutory conditions. So, ang sabi natin kanina, pag suspensive, nangyayari ang condition or pag nangyari ang condition, nag-a-acquire ka ng rights, no? So, sa example natin kanina, wherein I will give you 10,000 pesos if you pass the trigonometry subject. So, kapag naipasa na niya yung trigonometry subject, ibig sabihin ay nag-a-acquire siya ng karapatan or right. So, ano yun, ano? So, it is to demand the money, no? Demand from me na yung amount of money na ipinangako ko sa kanya kapalit ng pagtupad niya sa conditions na inimpose ko. So, as for resolutory naman, ang example natin ay I bound myself to shoulder my brother's tuition fee until he graduates. So, kapag siya ay nakagraduate, no, sabi nga natin, pag nagawa na ang resolutory conditions, that's the time na malolosnan niya yung rights already acquired. So, ano ba yung rights already acquired? It is to receive the money for his tuition fees or yung pag-shoulder ko ng kanyang tuition fees. So, next slide po. Yan. So, Article 1182. Sabi dyan, when the fulfillment of the condition depends upon the sole will of the debtor, then the conditional obligation shall be void. If it depends upon the chance or the will of the third person, the obligation shall take effect. So, next slide po. So, dito, we need to define the terms no, na meron tayo. And this is what you call potestative conditions. So, ano ba yung potestative conditions muna? A condition suspensive in nature which depends upon the sole will of one of the contracting parties. Ano? So, take note na it is a condition specifically suspensive in nature which depends upon the sole will of one of the contracting parties. So, it can be suspensive condition sorry, which depends upon the will of the debtor, or a suspensive condition which depends upon the will of the creditor. Kasi either one of the both parties. So question is, what if the suspensive condition depends upon the will of the debtor? Would that mean that the same conditional obligation is void? So, ang sagot is yes. So, next slide po. The answer is yes. No, kapag the suspensive condition depends upon the will of the debtor, would that mean that the same conditional obligation is void? So it's a yes. Kasi nakalagay naman sa Article 1181 na when the fulfillment of the condition depends upon the sole will of the debtor, the conditional obligation shall be void. Kasi in the case, yung mismong condition na yung mismong fulfillment niya ang in this case kasi yung mismong conditional obligation na yung yung fulfillment niya, unlike kanina duration lang yun. So kanina ang sabi dun is sure na magbabayad sa ang sabi kanina sure na magbabayad, pero yung duration ng period is yun lang ang depending on the will of the debtor. Pero itong Article 1182, ang nagde-depend na sa will of the debtor ay yung fulfillment of the very obligation itself. So ayon daw sa Article 1182 is void daw po iyon. So next slide po. So suspensive condition that depends upon the will of the creditor is valid. So dito tawag dito. Ang dito ang creditor is interested in the fulfillment or the creditor is interested in its fulfillment of the obligation kasi ikaw ang may pautang or ikaw yung nagpautang sa debtor, ano. So the law presumes that as a creditor, you want the fulfillment of the obligation or gusto mong ikaw ay mabayaran or gusto mong magawa na ang obligation ng debtor. So the law sees that yun ang iyong gusto as a creditor. So that stands as valid. So take note na suspensive condition that depends upon the will of the debtor is void, but the suspensive condition that depends upon the will of the creditor stands as valid. So next slide po. So there's an stance wherein only the condition is void, but the pre-existing obligation is valid. Ano? So, ito yung tinatawag na only the condition is void. So, if the obligation is pre-existing one and therefore does not depend for its existence upon the fulfillment of the debtor of potestative condition, only the condition is void, leaving unaffected obligation itself. So, next slide po. So, example natin dito is debtor borrowed 10,000 pesos from the creditor which is payable in 2 months. Subsequently, the debtor promises to pay the creditor after the debtor sells his car. So, in this case, may pre-existing obligation. Ano? That is to pay the 10,000 pesos payable in 2 months. So, may period na provided, pero here lies the problem. Ang sabi dyan, in the condition is, ang problem is in the condition wherein ang nakastate dyan is I'll be paying in 2 months if I'm able to sell my car. Ano? So, paano pag hindi niya nabenta? Di ba? So, dyan naglalays ang mga ang only the condition is void, no, leaving unaffected ano yan, uh, void ang condition because it depends upon the sole will of the debtor, pero yung pre-existing obligation niya is valid. So ano ba yung pre-existing obligation? Ano, it is to pay the 10,000 pesos payable in 2 months. Pero void yung kanyang condition wherein bago ko makabayad o bago ko magbayad sa iyo, kailangan ko munang maibenta yung sasakyan ko. So that's a void. No? So next slide. So next is casual conditions. If the suspensive condition depends upon the chance or upon the will of a third person, the obligation subject to it is valid. So for example, um, if a building contractor obliges himself in favor of the building owner to repair at building contractor's expenses any damage that may cause to the building by any date of the completion of its construction. So dito halimbawa nasira ang building ni owner because of the earthquake, no, then the building contractor would make himself liable daw for the expenses of its repair. So ano yung casual conditions doon, no? So kung babasahin natin ang casual conditions, if it depends upon the chance or upon the will of the third person. So kung i-analyze natin, ang chance dito is yung chance na magkaroon ng earthquake within the 10 years of its completion, no. Ang suspensive condition 'yon kasi kapag nangyari ang chance na iyon, it will give rise to an obligation, ano, sabi kasi natin na it will give rise to an obligation to repair on the part of the building contractor's expense, ano, and that stands as valid. So, kailangan natin sa casual conditions, kailangan natin makita ang pag-occur ng chance or upon the will of the third person, ano. So dito sa example natin is chance ang mag-occur. So ang chance dito or ang casual conditions dito is yung pagkakaroon or yung chance na magka-earthquake within the 10 years of its completion. So next slide po. So mixed conditions. Mixed conditions are the obligation is valid if the suspensive condition depends partly upon chance and partly upon the will of the third person. So, next slide po. So, example natin kanina, kagaya ng kanina sa is if a building contractor obliges himself in favor of the building owner to repair it at building contractor's expense, any damage that may any damage that ano nangyari. Yan.